Hey everyone, Ciara here for this week's Wellness Nugget. So this week I thought I'd spend some time talking about something that I learned in this really great book. The book is called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And the book talks a lot about trauma and how trauma impacts our functioning and how detrimental it can be. And it also dives more into the brain structures that are involved in trauma responses. So I was reading this book, and in a certain section of the book, it talked a lot about the different brain structures. And he really worded it in a way that I was like, huh, that makes sense. So I thought I'd share that with you all, and I felt like it was pretty applicable to a lot of different situations. So not just trauma, but maybe you feel more anxious in situations, or you feel panicky, or sometimes we just have these responses and we sit back and we're like, huh, I don't know why I did that. Like thinking back now, maybe I wouldn't have done that, or I would have done something differently. So I thought that this analogy that I'm going to talk about was pretty relevant to all those things. So I thought I'd share that with you all. So starting off, Bessel van der Kolk talks about different brain structures that are in charge of a trauma response. So he talks about our amygdala, which is part of our limbic system, and is also in charge of our fight, flight, or freeze response. So it's in charge of determining if something is threatening our environment and then determining our response there. So sometimes we freeze in situations, sometimes we fight back in situations, or sometimes we say we gotta get the heck out of there and we flee. Then the other brain structure he talks about is our prefrontal cortex. So our prefrontal cortex, we think, is like our logical mind. So it's rational, it helps with our decision making, it holds our executive functioning, and helps us kind of engage in these behaviors after we've taken a second to say, pause, I'm going to think about it. This is probably the best way I'm going to go with this, so I'm going to choose this decision. So he talks about amygdala and prefrontal cortex. So when he's talking about the amygdala, van der Kolk says that our amygdala is like a smoke detector. So like I mentioned, it's picking up on threats in our environment. And then he says our prefrontal cortex is like the watchtower. So our amygdala picks up on those responses or picks up on those threats, triggers that fight or flight response, and then our prefrontal cortex modulates that response. So it really kind of says, okay, this is the appropriate response, or it says, yes, this is a threat. We need to do something in this situation. So for example, let's say you're cooking dinner and you set something on fire by accident, which I have done many times, and your smoke detector goes off because there's a fire. So a smoke detector is going off indicates that there's a fire. So we had that response initially like, oh crap, fire. So then our prefrontal cortex comes online and says, yes, there is a fire. Next step, to keep me safe, I need to put this fire out. So we can understand how smoke detector, watchtower work together to kind of figure out, okay, yes, this is threatening. Yes, I need to do something to keep myself safe. Sometimes, though, our smoke detector goes off when there's not necessarily something super threatening in our environment. So I don't know about you all, but pretty much anytime I cook, my smoke detector goes off, and it's super annoying. Literally, I could be making a pizza in the oven and it'll go off. So it detects some heat and maybe detects some smoke, and it goes off saying the same response of fire, danger, something has to happen, triggers that fight or flight response. So then normally what happens is that my prefrontal cortex hops online and says, okay, there's really not a fire here. Yes, this could be potentially dangerous, but there's no fire. So there's no need to panic right now, but we'll keep an eye on this so we can monitor it to make sure it doesn't turn into a fire. So we can see again how sometimes our amygdala misinterprets things in our environment, and then our watchtower still hops online and says, hey, hold on, let's pump the brakes. There's nothing super threatening in our environment. Where it gets a little bit trickier is when our amygdala is firing, so our smoke detector is going off a lot more frequently and misinterpreting things in our environment as threatening, and then our prefrontal cortex goes offline. So our watchtower kind of goes offline. So, for example, let's say you walk into your home and your smoke detector is going off. And you're like, what the heck? My smoke detector's going off. I just got home. So then you have that fight or flight response of, holy crap, my smoke detector's going off. Something has to be wrong. So most times our prefrontal cortex hops back online and says, hey, no, nothing's here. Like, that's weird, but it's okay. What happens, especially with trauma, is that that prefrontal cortex goes offline. So we're having that response from our amygdala without anything to moderate and modulate that response. So without anything to say, hey, let's check the facts of the situation. There's nothing here. It's okay. We can calm that response down. So we can start to see how when our amygdala is firing a lot and misinterpreting threats in our situation, we can start to see how this can be really tricky navigating everyday life. And if we think about our brain, our number one job of our brain is to keep ourselves safe. So we can think, hey, brain, I know what you're doing. I know that you're trying to keep me safe. I know that you want to protect me. And sometimes, again, it's not super helpful in the moment. So I just thought that was something really interesting to share and a really nice way to think about situations where we maybe feel more on edge or feel more anxious, or we're having those responses where we can feel like irritability, we can feel our chest pain, understanding more how that's working in the brain. And if we can start to think of, okay, yes, brain, I'm going to have compassion for you. I know what you're doing. You're trying to keep me safe. And if we can try to pull ourselves back in the moment of saying, okay, I'm going to try to put my prefrontal cortex online, really think about the situation. There's nothing threatening here. So I'm going to try to calm myself down a little bit. So I just thought that was really cool. Try to think about that next time you feel like you're in a situation where you're having this response and maybe there's nothing super apparent in your environment that could be triggering it. So thanks for tuning in for this week. It ran a little bit long, so apologies for that. But see you all next week.
This is an informational video that is not intended to replace professional treatment for specific mental health problems or symptoms. If you're having thoughts about harming yourself or others, call your therapist or doctor right now. You can find contact information and call your nearest HSO location to schedule an appointment at www.healthsourceofohio.org/locations. You can also talk to someone now by calling the suicide hotline at 1-800-273-8255.